please, let's give a round of applause for all the students at Seattle Central. It means so much to see all of the beautiful people here today, and it means so much to see all of you here gathered for this nonviolent protest against the WTO and the racist criminal justice system. I've been talking to reporters all week who are wondering, will there be violence or will there be unnecessary property destruction? And I've told them no. We don't want to have anything happen to take the light away from the important issues of unfair trade policies that cause so much despair or the inherent fairness in the criminal justice system. So I want to ask all of you, can we work together to keep this a peaceful event? Can we protect each other by not letting anything unnecessary happen? Good. I also want to say to the uninformed people out there who say we're unpatriotic, that it's the highest form of patriotism to want your country to be a better and more just nation. Yes. I also want to say to the police that our movement is a movement based in love. We are a spiritual people who just want a better world. We are not animals, so don't beat us. We are not animals, so don't tear gas us. We are citizens who live in a democracy. We have a constitutional and a moral right to gather together and protest of injustice. So treat us with the human respect we deserve. And if the police would listen, they would see the issues we raise affect them as workers and affect their children too. And my hope is one day they'll see themselves as workers and align themselves with progressive movements for social change. So it's been 2 years since the first WTO protest here in Seattle. And here we are again raising the same issues. But this year, the WTO is too afraid to come where the people are. They have chosen to hide in Qatar where there can be no protests. Well, our message today is, you can run, but you can't hide. You might not see it on CNN, and you might not read about it in the Seattle Times, but the movement against globalization is growing every day. People around the world are tired of being raped by greedy corporations and their allies in the government. But as we build this movement, we still have work to do. We have to be more creative. We have to find new and engaging ways to explain the sometimes complex issues of globalization and put it into real-life terms. Terms that will resonate with all people, not just middle-class white people. We have to be able to tell the stories. We have to be able to talk about the workers in sweatshops who work for $1 or $2 an hour in buildings with no ventilation and are locked in, beaten sometimes, receive no health care or other benefits, and work 60 or more hours a week. We have to tell the stories of Miss Jones right here in Seattle, who's getting kicked off of welfare because of welfare reform, which is a type of structural adjustment. Miss Jones has 3 children and doesn't make enough money at her job to support them, doesn't make enough money to put food on the table or clothes on their backs, but will be kicked off of welfare soon under the current agreement. We have to tell the stories of how the WTO policies around intellectual property rights are causing a rapid increase in AIDS in children in sub-Saharan Africa. We've got to do a much better job in telling the real-life stories. We've got to show the world how the policies of the WTO are inhumane and unacceptable. We have to find a way through the real-life stories to compel the masses of the people to rise in opposition to what are clearly unfair economic policies that our government supports and corporate power benefits from. Not workers, but CEOs and wealthy stockholders. These days, in the wake of September 11th, so many in our country are asking why so many people around the world hate us. Well, if we lived under oppressive conditions like so many do in the global South, conditions directly caused by U.S. economic policies, we would have some anger too. Let's just look at our foreign policy, which is in actuality diplomacy out of the barrel of a gun. George Kennan, a former State Department head, once said, We in America have 50% of the world's wealth, but only 6% of the world's population. This can only cause envy and resentment. He said we should cease talking about vague concepts of human rights and raising the standards of living around the world. The day will come when we have to deal in straight power politics. That doctrine, that cold, ruthless way of viewing the world has not changed. We live in a country founded on militarism, which is applied racism. Militarism is the martial enforcement of racist and genocidal policies to maintain global white supremacy and economic domination. And the history tells the truth. From the genocide of indigenous people of this land to Haiti, Korea, Vietnam, Somalia, Iraq, and now Afghanistan, this country has been quick to use the lethal force of the military against people of color to maintain that political and economic domination that I just talked about. And people still wonder why so many in the world hate us. But the rage isn't just abroad. It is growing here at home. And one of the institutions that fuel that rage is the racist criminal injustice system. Again, the facts bear the truth. From the murders of Amadou Diallo, David Walker, Michael Ealy, and Aaron Roberts here in Seattle, the criminal justice system on all levels shows only contempt for people of color. Today in America, half of the 1.2 million prisoners are black, even though we make up only 13% of the population. States around the country are spending more on building prisons than they're spending on building colleges. 14% of the people in jail today are Latino, but only 9% of the population is Latino. Here in Washington State, African American youth are twice as likely to be incarcerated as white youth. And here in King County, African American people only make up 40% of the population, African American make up 40% of the jail population, but are only 10% of the county population. Something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong with this. It's so wrong that it should make any decent, freedom-loving person sick to their stomach. But if we're ever to change this society and change this world, we have to make these broad connections. We have to show how militarism by the armed forces is the same as militarism by the police. And that's not a hard thing to do. Look at the terminology they use. The war on drugs, the war on gangs, the war on crime, which in actuality is a war on the poor and war on people of color. We have to connect racism and inequality in the schools to the movement for environmental justice. We have to connect the struggle for affordable and decent housing to the fight for health care for everyone. We must connect the peace movement with the welfare rights movement. And we must connect the anti-globalization movement with the movement to undo institutional racism. We have to make these connections, and we must also make these connections across the artificial national boundaries that exist. Our struggle is directly connected to the struggle of the Mayan people in Chiapas. Our struggle is connected to the victims of AIDS in South Africa. And our struggle is connected to the workers' movements in Brazil and throughout South America. We've got to make all of these connections, and we've got to make them now. For too long, we have suffered under the hands of oppression. For too long, CEOs have made 400 times that of workers. For too long, people of color have been racially profiled by the police. For too long, Western nations have been exploiting the people of the global South. For too long, women have made less than men for the same work. And for too long, people who work in hospitals cleaning them up can't afford to get a bed in those same hospitals. For too long, we spent more on the military than we've spent on educating people. Just on October 2nd, the military voted for 11% increase, or the U.S. government voted for 11% increase in government spending to the tune of $354 billion, while we still have people sleep on the streets, children going to bed hungry in America. That is not right, is it? No! This injustice has gone on too long, but now is the time to make the wrong right. The spirits of our ancestors are calling out for us to come together and stand for righteousness. But the only way to do that, as history shows, is to organize. We have to build a multiracial, multi-class movement, and we have to deal with racism to make that happen. We also have to deal with our class prejudice to make that happen. And we have to check, each of us have to check ourselves on what we do that keep us separated from each other. We also have to develop a clear historical and political analysis to guide the work we have to do. And in some way, shape, or form, we have to bring spirituality into our movement. Yeah. Not necessarily religion, but the value of compassion, a deep love for humanity, a commitment to peace, and a burning desire for justice. Yes. We must let go of the selfish individualism and materialism and be willing to struggle for a cause bigger than ourselves. So my question to each of you, are you ready to build a nonviolent movement for social change? Are you ready to build a movement based in a deep love for all of humanity? Are you ready to give up some of your time to work for the people? Are you ready to go to jail if we have to stand for justice? Are you ready for a long-term struggle? Are you ready for a struggle? Are you ready for a struggle? Let's make George Bush, Dick Cheney, and the WTO meeting in Qatar hear us. Put your right fist in the air. Let me hear you say, we want justice. 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 Thank you.
Sisters and brothers, you know, we're here once again face to face with the same people that we've been facing time and time again, you know. Even though many of you may not remember, and you might think, well, what the hell is he talking about? Why does he say that? Well, this is nothing new. The WTO is nothing new. It's just a revamping of what we've already faced in the past. This is a repetition of what has been going on throughout human history. It is the rule of the few, those in power and of wealth, over the many. The women in the maquiladora, the child weaving and assembling, the campesino in the field, the indigenous in Chiapas and Ecuador, the mother, the student, the worker, the slave, you and me. And now here we are once again, old adversaries, new bodies. Today the WTO begins its 4th ministerial conference. In plain words, what does that mean? That means illegal economic terms of conquest and colonialization of this planet Earth. And why do I say conquest and colonialization? Because in these agreements and treaties that and let me clarify who they are about only 23 of the planet's wealthiest industrialized countries, because the rest of the 144 members of this so-called WTO were not allowed to participate or might have been threatened by U.S. intervention and sanctions. These agreements will allow anything and everything that would ever be in the public trust or for its good to be priced and sold to the highest bidder. In terms of colonization, these agreements implement corporate rule over people of other nations, other cultures and languages. They must change and accept these new rules of life, for in not doing so, they become obstacles to free corporate trade. And as history has shown, anything in the way of those implementing this new rule get eliminated through conquest. It is a violent action. Many will starve, many will die. Many have. There still exist cultures that are not consumers, which are not producers for this capitalist system. Their space and opportunity to exist will be eliminated. She or he that cannot incorporate themselves into the new model will perish. Economic sanctions, military intervention will be used to uphold these new laws that the WTO will impose. As students, your education will be changed, as it has been for a few years now. It will no longer be a public service. It will be an open market. $1 trillion are spent globally on education. And to those who are represented by the WTO, that money needs to be open for reaping. In doing so, education will be less funded by taxes, for this will become a barrier to trade. Financial aid will be reduced drastically or eliminated, because that too will be seen as a barrier to free corporate trade. Thinking anything other than the corporate ideology will be illegal, because that too becomes a barrier to free trade. And why do I say that? Well, if we take an example, at the University of Wisconsin, Reebok was going to give them a big donation, but because the students were able to organize against what Reebok stands, they did not receive that financial donation, which means that Reebok could not have any interest in that organization and that school. Under the WTO terms of GATS, that will be seen as a barrier to trade, which means that your freedom to speech, your freedom to stand up for what you believe in, your freedom to protect your public institutions will be illegal. Freedom of speech will be outlawed, because in crying out the injustices of corporations, you affect their business, and that, my dear sisters and brothers, is a barrier to free corporate trade. Education will be available on aisle 13, but only those who can afford it. And if you can afford it, your only choices will be technical training, business management and administration, anything that lies in the interest of the corporate agenda. So what do? We resist. We must organize ourselves and resist against these organizations. Yeah, there are many of them. There's the WTO, there's the IMF, there's the World Bank, there's Citicorp, there's Nike, there's Gap. But you know what? They're all connected. They're all the faces of the same monster. But they are vulnerable. They are vulnerable. Why do I say this? Can anyone tell me why I say that they're vulnerable? That's a good answer right there. I'll tell you why they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable because they depend on us. Without us, there is no them. We are the ones that do the work that makes their profits. We are the ones that consume their products. We are the ones who pay taxes. We are the ones that suffer the injustices brought about corporations. Students, I know you hear this a lot, but you have to organize. People, organizations, everybody's got to have to come together. We have to resist and build the alternatives to this nightmare. Some may say how? Well, there's one simple alternative, and many may not agree with it, but it's still one alternative that we have. And one very simple way to start is to pressure our elected officials to truly represent our interests, and us, not in the interests of those who get tax breaks over and over again, while our public services suffer because of budget cuts. We must no longer bear the cost of their subsidies and their tax breaks. I think perhaps it's time to take up that old saying here that happened in the first turn of the American history, which said something like, no taxation without representation. Because it's true that elected officials are not representing our interests. Us, the taxpayers, they're representing the interests of corporations. Another one, I think, that has become very popular and very strong in its sense is to take to the streets. Let it be known that today we no longer wish to be the slave. Today we wish to be able to live a life of dignity and justice and ensure that others throughout this planet may do the same. I heard Dustin talk about spirituality. I'd like to close this off with an old Nahuatl poem, and it's going to be in Nahuatl. Many of you may not understand it, but I hope that you can feel the importance of it. This is a Nahuatl poem that the indigenous people recited before going out to face the conquistadores from Spain. And with this, I leave you, sisters and brothers, and hope that my ancestors that fought some of the first battles against this oppressive force may be with you today on the streets of Seattle. Awi tlacuacalco, no te cuia yaqui, no qua tlacal. Ya ne kayapa inewa, ayaka no mati. Netzahuatzli awi ayaka no mati naya. Yawa cuitlalok. Tlachocalco no te yawak, iscuatlatoaya no plichan. Iyay cuetla tocuitlik.
Kukimatlan papano kutsasla. We olopat lokwak kuyakani nomali yinemanui yinumayi you quick nomali. Before I continue, I know some of you have some things to bang on, so if you could please bang something rhythmic so we can get something more tribal going here. We utnawat lopatsla yikwak yonamali yinemani yinemanui yiyok yinomali. We slokatla tepitspotla ikwa inomali inomai nikwak inomali. It's nawak tekwayik machiyol temaya awi oyatonak yawi oyatonak machiyol tetemoya tochitlawa teikwak machiyol telemoya awi oyatanak yawi oyatanak awi machiyola tomayawak. And one last words to the WTO. Fuck you! We're not gonna fucking take this anymore!
Today, Pressure Point is an organization that works on corporate power issues and globalization. How many people were in the streets 2 years ago and shut the WTO down? How many people started a movement that's meant hundreds of thousands of people in the street in Quebec City, in Washington, D.C. against the World Bank? Hundreds of thousands at Genoa at the G8. And today, the whole world is watching. And we have a message for George Bush and Dick Cheney and the racist regime which is bombing Afghanistan. It's corporate globalization that breeds terrorism. Corporate globalization is terrorism. Institutions like the WTO are the very mechanics of that terrorism. And we're standing today in solidarity to shut it down once again. There's a key issue in Qatar. There was a key issue 2 years ago. Some of you might remember no new round. They have not been able to get a new round. They will not be able to get a new round because we are not going to allow it. Pressure Point has a representative in Qatar. The WTO has allowed one representative from each non-profit or an NGO around the world. Democracy in action. It's very important that these people stand in solidarity with the brothers and sisters from the global south and ensure that the WTO and the rich countries like the US and Europe are not able to force their agenda upon them. So I want to read a few remarks from Sarah Wright, who's standing in solidarity in Qatar right now. So, this was written yesterday. Word is that the pressure is on very strongly from the U.S. to call for a new round, especially in the light of September 11th. There's a feeling that the powerful countries have had too many blows and need a win, so they'd be trying to pull everyone into line. The group of least developed countries in particular have strong reservations about this and want the WTO to formally make development a priority rather than free trade for free trade's sake. There is no sense of a consensus, although the U.S. says there's a consensus, but there's no sense of a consensus that a new round is the best thing to do, and that's certainly not from the least developed countries. Sarah also says it's a very restrictive atmosphere here with civil society delegated being ferried around in buses and under solid watch from the Qatari army, police, and unknown other plainclothes people. Yesterday, this was Wednesday, a Qatari man was shot and killed as he apparently opened fire at a Qatari military airfield where U.S. officials were present. There's a lot of division between countries, with many third world nations very unimpressed with the draft declaration, the process by which it was developed, the fact that it reflects the agenda of rich countries, and the strident calls for a new round from the WTO Secretary in industrialized countries. People might remember 2 years ago, everything was smooth sailing. The most powerful country in the world, the United States, was hosting the WTO. Everything was going to go ahead. All that shit that they wanted to put on us and the rest of the world was going to be formality. Because of the protests on the streets, because of each and every one of us saying no and standing up, we gave the confidence and the security to the African delegation to lead a walkout, and the WTO has been a shambles since. We have to say today, and today, by standing in solidarity, we can do that again. Pressure Point has outlined some things that we want to see accomplished at the WTO. Most of all, we'd like it to be eliminated, but within the context that it exists, it's important that there's no expansion of scope or power of the WTO until fundamental problems with the current system are addressed. Central to the review and alterations is the need for improved, more democratic and participatory structure to the WTO, particularly from civil society. Food security, meaningful development outcomes for the least developed countries, human rights and environmental sustainability should provide the cornerstone of all negotiations. This is the least democratic institution in the world. We have got to democratize it if it's going to exist. No patents on life. Huge issue within the WTO, huge issue for all of us, the patents on life. Multinational corporations want to take indigenous knowledge and patent it so that people have to pay for it. People have been using this knowledge for thousands of years. The WTO can no longer pursue an approach that does not reflect the different opportunities and constraints faced by its members. It's time that we go back to the word freedom and remember its value. As Gandhi said, freedom is never dear at any price. It is the breath of life. Globalization and trade liberalization as it stands today is about the imposition of structures that will affirm and further ingrain established world corporate hierarchies. To move beyond these, we must search for alternatives, speak of new possibilities, and draw upon our diverse cultures to envisage a just and equitable culture. So, in closing, Milan Kundera said, the struggle of people against power is a struggle of memory against forgetfulness. We cannot afford not to learn from our great history of resisting tyranny as represented in the form of these corporations. It is crucial that we sink the WTO, the FTAA, NAFTA, and all the free trade organizations. It's crucial that we find cures to these just as we found cures to communicable diseases. Free trade agreements like the WTO are the symptoms of our society's bubonic plague, which is corporate power. And until we address the roots and underlying causes of that power, we'll forever be dealing with increasingly more severe and deadly symptoms. And we, human beings on the planet, no longer have that luxury. So once again, the whole world is watching. The whole world is watching. The whole world is watching. The whole